Good morning and welcome to Daybreak on A News. I'm Katie Wilson, coming to you live from Baku. Here's the stories making the headlines this morning. Iran is warning it could go on the offensive in the Strait of Hormuz if diplomacy with Washington fails. Global markets are under pressure as rising oil prices fuel fresh inflation concerns amid the continuing Iran conflict. Russia is intensifying attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, with Kyiv accusing Moscow of trying to weaponize winter. Thanks for joining us. Iran says it's moving towards a more aggressive military posture after efforts to reach a permanent settlement with the United States stalled. The warning comes as Tehran and Washington remain locked in a dispute over the expired Islamabad memorandum and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran says it will shift to a fully offensive military posture after efforts to negotiate a permanent end to the war with the United States stalled. A senior Iranian official told Reuters that Tehran would carry out a timely and precise military operation to break the U.S. naval blockade on Iran. The official said Washington must meet all provisions of the Islamabad-brokered Memorandum of Understanding within weeks before further negotiations can continue. The memorandum, signed by Iran and the United States in June, outlined a framework to end military operations and reach a final settlement. It expired on June 17th, with both sides accusing each other of failing to comply with its terms. Iran's foreign ministry says no talks have begun, although discussions on sanctions relief and nuclear issues could have been extended if no final deal was reached. Iran and Oman had agreed on a navigation route through the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran and Washington remain divided over control of the strategic waterway, with Iran claiming the right to manage the strait under the memorandum, a position rejected by Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump said his country was not seeking to extend the agreement, claiming Iran's military had been totally defeated and reiterating that Tehran would never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. Trump also criticized Oman over its role in talks on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, saying the country had not behaved very well, but that Washington could handle the situation easily. Meanwhile, Türkiye's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called for maximum use of diplomatic opportunities and said Ankara would continue supporting efforts aimed at achieving peace. During his phone call with Donald Trump, Erdogan added that the joint defense agreement signed with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia would contribute to regional stability and security.
Meanwhile, Iran has announced that as long as the status of its 3 missing fighter jet pilots is not clarified, Tehran assumes that they are in Qatari captivity. Tehran also stresses that the Iran-U.S. ceasefire deal that expired yesterday was not implemented because it was violated from the very first days of its signing in June. A News' correspondent Touraj Shiralilou reports from the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman's weekly briefing.
Iran says it is in contact with Qatari officials over the fate of 3 Air Force pilots who have been missing since their fighter jets were down during the early days of the conflict with Israel and the United States in March. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said Tehran has not concluded that the pilots were killed during a mission targeting U.S. bases in Qatar and is seeking information to establish their status. Baghai also criticized regional countries for allowing U.S. forces to use their territory and airspace during the conflict. On Iran-U.S. relations, the spokesman said a memorandum signed on 17th of June, which provided for negotiations toward a longer-term ceasefire, had been violated by the U.S. soon after it was agreed. He said planned talks on sanctions relief and the nuclear issue did not take place after U.S. attacks resumed. Baghai said Iran would not make decisions based on deadlines or pressures, but according to its national interest and security. He also said Iran and Oman have agreed on a navigation route through the Strait of Hormuz and are working on a joint statement covering the arrangements. Touraj Shiralilou from Iranian Foreign Ministry for A News.
Oil markets are starting the day higher as uncertainty over the conflict in the Middle East continues to weigh on traders and investors. Here's the latest on oil prices and the wider impact on financial markets.
Oil prices moved higher on Tuesday as hopes of a U.S. Iran peace deal weakened, raising concerns over possible disruptions to global energy supplies. Brent crude rose 27 cents, or 0.3%, to around $91 a barrel after reaching its highest level since late July in the previous session. The uncertainty also weighed on U.S. markets. Wall Street's three main indexes ended lower on Monday. The S&P 500 fell 0.5%. The Dow Jones lost around 0.5%, while the Nasdaq dropped 0.3%. Progress towards peace talks and the resumption of oil tanker traffic through the strategically important Strait of Hormuz has slowed. Only 5 commodity vessels transited the strait on Saturday after attacks on tankers, and there were none registered for Sunday versus 31 in the prior weekend. That's according to ship tracking data from Kepler showed. But any prolonged disruption could put further pressure on oil supplies and prices.
Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said on Monday that he plans to speak with President Trump before the 19th of August. That's ahead of Washington's 50% tariffs on Canadian products. The tax hikes could cause job losses in some already struggling industries. It could also complicate broader negotiations over the future of North America's free trade agreement. Last month, Trump refused to extend it for another 16 years. On Monday, Canada's minister responsible for bilateral U.S. trade stepped up talks with his counterpart in Washington. Now, President Trump's approval rating has dropped to its lowest point of his current term. That's according to a new Reuters and Ipsos poll. Only 33% of Americans surveyed backed his performance in the White House, while 64% disapproved. That's down from 35% earlier this month and matches the lowest approval rating of his previous term, recorded in December 2017. The poll also found 80% of Americans expect U.S. involvement in the war with Iran to continue for an extended period, including 87% of Democrats and 71% of Republicans. Now, President Trump's envoy and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, left Jerusalem on Monday without a breakthrough. It's after 2 days of talks with Israeli and Hamas leaders over a stalled US plan to end the war in Gaza. However, both sides stood firm on key demands. Nick Harper has more from Washington, D.C.
2 high-stakes meetings in 2 days. Jared Kushner, the US envoy, and President Donald Trump's son-in-law had the task of trying to get the US peace plan for Gaza back on track. The talks were brokered to try and break the impasse, with neither Israel nor Hamas keeping their respective commitments. And after the Israeli Prime Minister, earlier this month, roundly rejected the plan, continuing attacks on Gaza and refusing to withdraw Israeli troops from the enclave. On Sunday, Kushner met Hamas's political leader, a rare direct meeting, which we're told was very productive. Hamas committed to fully disarm and cease immediately all military activity. However, since last year's peace plan was agreed, the group has taken no tangible steps to handing over their arms. Since then, behind the scenes, Trump's Board of Peace has been trying to advance the plan. After Kushner's Monday meeting in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office released a statement saying they had a deep and constructive discussion. They agreed to establish 2 working groups, one on disarmament and demilitarization of Gaza, and the other on sanitation and public health issues in Gaza. However, no immediate promise to withdraw Israeli troops or show trust in Hamas's disarmament commitment. And they agreed the reconstruction of Gaza would not start until Hamas fully disarmed. Earlier, 8 foreign ministers from Arab and Muslim-majority nations condemned Israel's refusal to accept the US-backed roadmap for Gaza, warning it would derail prospects for a lasting settlement. So, no major breakthrough from Kushner's trip, just more promises to uphold commitments and have more meetings to try and advance peace. Netanyahu is up for re-election in October, and it seems unlikely the Israeli leader will make any major Gaza concessions before then. Nick Harper for A News in Washington, D.C.
Joining us now to discuss the latest developments in the war between the US and Iran is Umer Kumar Agarwal, geopolitical analyst from Chennai in India. Thank you for being with us this morning. Now, why has Trump threatened Oman, obviously a long-standing US ally, at such a sensitive point in negotiations with Iran?
The basic point is, to my understanding, is Trump does not want any other Middle Eastern nation to actually control Strait of Hormuz without its consent. Basically, Oman was trying to bypass America, and America does not want its control over Strait of Hormuz to diminish. Also, if you see, a few days back, the Mecca Pact was signed between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. So basically, what is happening is the Middle Eastern countries are now taking care of their own security. Trump had to give its blessing yesterday. But now, if you see, even Oman and Iran, if they start negotiating and if they reach a broader consensus for maritime trade and navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, US will not be having any influence in the Middle East. So basically, Trump, out of what you say, exasperation, might have made this statement. It is basically saying that American foreign policy regarding Middle East is fumbling, and they would like to have an honorable exit, but the situation has become so problematic that they are unable to pull out.
Now, the 60-day window for a US-Iran deal has now expired. How close, or more importantly, how far apart are the two sides?
I think they are far more than ever, because the 60-day deal basically gave time for both parties to replenish their arms. And I believe that sooner or later, again, the war will start. And if you see, the crude prices are continuously rising. It is around $85. And if I am to assume, Trump never wants any deal to happen in the Middle East. What is happening is, by continuing the war, who is actually getting affected? It is the countries in the Middle East. Which refineries is Iran targeting? It is targeting Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and other oil-producing nations in the Middle East. And who is actually benefiting? It is America. Previously, I can say for India, India used to import majority of its natural gas from Qatar. Right now, India is importing 74% of its natural gas from America. So America is profiteering from this war by ensuring that the solution, tangible solution, does not appear in the Middle East. And by provoking Iran, it is actually destroying the Middle East energy infrastructure. And in the way it is able
can I
to
just
sell
go
its
back,
oil.
sir, to something you mentioned now? 80% of Americans actually share your view and expect the US involvement in this war to continue. What does that mean for Trump domestically? We're seeing his approval ratings at currently the lowest they've ever been.
Basically, Trump is not seeking any re-election because his second term is there, it's going to end. Anyway, what he is doing is he is profiteering from the war. He is profiteering personally. And few days back, he had he had also stated that he will be giving preferential access to investors for around $100,000 to access his Truth Social account. So what does it mean is that Americans are actually disappointed with Trump because Trump is not taking care of American interests, but Trump's family interests. And his all-time rating has plummeted to 37%. And midterm is around the corner. And I don't think so after November, Trump will be able to carry out war on Iran because it will require congressional and Senate approval for any further attacks.
And Trump is calling on Iran to surrender and says he doesn't want to extend this agreement. What does that suggest about the diplomatic process going on here?
So basically, you cannot believe Trump. Whatever he says, he will do the opposite. He will call for that he is interested in peace treaty, but suddenly he will do something which is very much different from common expectations. So basically, there is a dilemma, and I don't think so. This war is going to end anytime soon. It is going to be a long, protracted war, and in the process, what you will see, the Gulf in Middle East energy infrastructure is going to be affected. The supply chain is going to be affected. The BRICS countries, basically, if you see India and China, they are going to get affected because we are the largest exporters or importers of energy from the Middle East, and any shock on the Strait of Hormuz actually benefits oil companies which have been traditionally supporting Trump.
Yeah, talk me through that more. Obviously, we've got the shipping through the Strait of Hormuz still severely disrupted. What about global oil supplies? Because it is affecting Western countries as well, isn't it?
Basically, it has affected the European countries. And basically, I believe that Trump wants that the dollar to be the primary reserve currency of the world, and it should be the primary currency for dealing in energy and crude oil. He basically wants the petrodollar arrangement to continue. So all this chaos benefits dollar. And also, there is no viable currency right now which can control, which can challenge the dollar. EU is very much dependent on Trump for its energy supplies because the Nord Stream gas pipeline has been blown off. And right now, the EU receives maximum of its gas supplies from America in LPG tankers.
Okay, now where does this go next, do you think? What should we be looking out for over the coming weeks, coming months?
Basically, this was going to be a long, protracted war, and the countries who are dependent on oil import will have to renegotiate their supplies and contracts with Western nations. And like India has renegotiated its supplies from America, Canada, Australia, Argentina, Venezuela, this shows that the energy dependency will shift from the Middle East to the Western Hemisphere. Basically, the Islamic countries are going to get affected, and the Christian West is going to gain from this war. This is clearly evident because the war should have got over, and even if you see, that Trump wants this war to continue in a long, protracted manner because it benefits his funders, the Texas lobby. This is what I believe.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your views. Obviously, we don't have anyone from the US or the Republican Party to reply to you, but as always, it's always great to hear your opinions and analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go to a quick break now, and after the break, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now, let's have a look at the global stories. Another wave of drone attacks has targeted Moscow and the surrounding region, including a Wildberries warehouse, according to the regional governor. Russian authorities reported downing hundreds of drones overnight.
At least one person was killed and 3 people were injured after a drone hit a warehouse of Russian e-commerce company Wildberries near Moscow and surrounding areas overnight. That's according to the regional governor, Andrei Vorobyov, on Telegram. Drones also damaged other buildings, including private houses, apartment buildings, shops and a power station. It's after a large-scale drone attack was reported over Moscow and the surrounding region early Tuesday morning. Moscow's mayor said at least 180 drones were shot down, while 620 drones reportedly headed toward the area between Monday evening and early Tuesday. Russian and Ukrainian Telegram channels both reported fires and possible damage in several locations, including Pavlovsky Posad and Lyubetsy. The reports have not been independently verified, and there were no immediate confirmed details on casualties or the extent of the damage. Ukraine has increasingly used long-range drones to target military and strategic facilities inside Russia, while Moscow continues to carry out strikes against targets in Ukraine.
Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow with more.
Ukraine's strikes on Russia's online retailer Wildberries are increasingly affecting the country's logistics and commercial infrastructure. Sunday's large-scale drone attack on the Moscow region hit Wildberries' major warehouse in Kaledino, near Podolsk. The facility is a major distribution hub for the Russian online retailer, covering some 250,000 square meters. Wildberries says the facility was affected and that an inventory assessment is being carried out. Ukrainian strikes have targeted multiple Wildberries logistics facilities since July. Reports say at least 7 of the 10 largest logistics centers have now been hit. The attacks are therefore becoming an economic and logistical issue for Russia, disrupting deliveries, affecting thousands of sellers who are using the platform, and putting additional pressure on the country's warehouse and distribution network. On Monday, the authorities in the Belgorod region said at least 6 people were killed and 4 wounded, including a 14-year-old child, in a missile strike on the village of Kalaskova. Authorities say a building was destroyed and a car was damaged. In the Arnhem region, a woman was killed after Ukrainian drones struck a private house, according to local authorities. Meanwhile, Russia's Ministry of Defense says its forces have taken control of Novosolochyn in the Zaporizhzhia region and the Andreevka community in the Donetsk region. The MOD also says Russian forces struck Ukrainian logistical centers, energy and transport infrastructure used by the military, as well as assembly workshops and assembly sites for the ground systems, UAV and unmanned boats. Dasha Chernyshova for A News in Moscow.
Well, the European Union is planning its toughest round of sanctions yet on Russia. The bloc's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas has said pressure must keep growing on Moscow until it ends its war with Ukraine.
Speaking to German newspaper Die Welt, the head of the European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, said the measures planned for the autumn would be the most extensive sanctions listings since the start of the war in Ukraine. If approved, they would increase the number of sanctioned Russian entities by about a third. Kallas said existing EU sanctions had already deprived Russia's war economy of more than €1 trillion, adding that pressure should continue until Moscow ends the war. She did not provide details on the timing or specific targets of the planned measures. The EU approved its latest sanctions package in July, introducing further restrictions on Russia's banking sector and cryptocurrency networks. Since 2022, Brussels has imposed repeated sanctions targeting Russian energy, finance, trade and access to technology. The EU says the measures have reduced Russian revenues and increased pressure on the country's economy. Russian officials, however, have repeatedly said European sanctions will not achieve their intended effect. The Kremlin has also said Moscow would respond to any new EU measures in line with its national interests.
3 people have been killed after a private helicopter crashed shortly after takeoff on the Greek island of Sifnos on Monday. That's according to the Greek Fire Service. The aircraft came down near homes in the Tholos area and caught fire. The victims were reportedly the pilot and a British couple who had recently married. The cause of the crash remains unknown and an investigation is underway. Belgium is battling its biggest wildfire on record, with around 3,000 hectares burned in the eastern part of the country. Rain and cooler temperatures are helping firefighters contain the flames. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where rain and cooler temperatures finally help firefighters gain ground against the biggest wildfire ever recorded in Belgium. The blaze has burned around 3,000 hectares of the High Fence Nature Reserve in eastern Belgium since Friday, following intense heat that pushed temperatures as high as 37 degrees Celsius. Approximately 500 firefighters from Belgium, Germany, and Luxembourg, backed by the military, farmers, and international crews, have been battling the flames, with aircraft also deployed through the EU's emergency response system. And there are now signs the situation is improving. Belgian officials say parts of the blaze have been contained and the fire is no longer spreading towards the German border. But authorities say they cannot yet declare the overall fire contained. The biggest challenge may now be underground, where fire is smoldering deep in the high-fence peat bogs and could burn for months. What started the blaze remains unclear. Human activity is responsible for roughly 90% of wildfires, whether through campfires, discarded cigarettes, or other causes. And Belgian prosecutors are now investigating how this fire began. It comes after Europe experienced its worst wildfire season on record last year, when more than 1 million hectares burned. This year is already breaking records in some countries, including France, with the traditional fire season still weeks from ending. Frustration boiled over Monday in the southwestern French village of Le Porge, where hundreds of homes were destroyed by a massive wildfire last month. Residents booed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu, accusing authorities of doing too little while protecting wealthier communities. As the fire spread, so too does the political anger, it seems. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Travellers between Britain and mainland Europe could have a new alternative to Eurostar from 2030. It's after Virgin Trains has overcome another regulatory hurdle to launch cross-channel services. The move could bring greater competition to a market Eurostar has dominated for more than 3 decades. Our correspondent reports from Manchester.
Britain's Virgin Trains is set to challenge Eurostar's long-standing dominance of passenger rail through the Channel Tunnel, potentially giving travellers more choice and cheaper fares between the UK and mainland Europe. The British company has been given approval by the UK rail regulator to run up to 20 daily return services from London to Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam. Eurostar is a high-speed rail operator connecting Britain with mainland Europe and has been the only passenger train company using the Channel Tunnel since 1994. But passengers will have to wait. Virgin's access to the railway network does not begin until October 2030, and it still needs access to European rail networks and safety approvals from regulators in Britain and the EU. The decision is another step forward for the project. Last October, Virgin was granted access to Eurostar's Temple Mills depot in East London, which is directly connected to High Speed 1, the railway linking London with the Channel Tunnel. Virgin says it plans to invest around £700 million in the project and create about 400 jobs. Its trains will run from London St Pancras to the same 3 European cities served by Eurostar. And there could be more competition. Trenitalia France has applied to run 10 daily return services between London and Paris from 2029, while startups Evelyn and Gemini Trains have also proposed international services. Virgin founder Sir Richard Branson has called for an end to Eurostar's 30-year monopoly and hopes to restore direct trains from London to Disneyland Paris. If the plans go ahead, passengers could eventually have more choice and potentially lower fares when travelling between Britain and mainland Europe. Zeynab Farajzadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Colombia's economic losses from last week's powerful earthquake are estimated at around 30 trillion pesos. That's $9.6 billion. Colombia's president said the losses, which mainly affected buildings and vital infrastructure, were estimated at over $9 billion. The 7.4 magnitude quake struck Western Colombia a week ago, killing 280 people, injuring more than 4,000, and leaving 143 others missing. Buildings were brought down in several areas, including the cities of Cali and Pereira. The scale of the damage is still being assessed as rescue and recovery efforts continue.
There's already an initial technical estimate of the economic impact of this entire disaster. A private firm estimated direct property damage in Choco, Valle del Cauca, Risaralda, Quindio and Caldas at nearly 30 trillion pesos, approximately 24.5 trillion in buildings and 5.5 trillion in infrastructure. Just imagine the scale of the disaster.
Nearly 500 people have been evacuated to safety in Costa Rica due to heavy rains. That's according to the National Emergency Commission. Rescue teams helped residents move to shelters in Cartago, Limon and Sarapiqui after tropical wave number 32 brought heavy rains over the weekend. It caused flooding, road closures and disruptions to public services, mainly in the northern zone, along the Caribbean coast and in Sarapiqui. Yesterday, protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, calling for an end to the military exercises between the United States and South Korea. Demonstrators say the so-called Freedom Shield drills are only serving to heighten tensions between Seoul and North Korea and China.
Although the exercise is presented as a defensive drill, given the actual content and scope of the military exercise, it can clearly only be seen as a rehearsal for an offensive war against China and North Korea. US President Donald Trump mentioned the reduction of the joint exercise yesterday as a way to shift the situation and make it easier to approach North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But I believe that is merely an excuse. Fundamentally, these military exercises will continue, which is why we are here to call for a complete halt to the South Korea-US military exercises.
Over to India now, and weeks after thousands of students protested in the capital, New Delhi, another student movement is underway in the east of the country. The so-called cockroach movement is pushing for new audits of state-run schools in its bid to bring about wide-scale reform to the education system. But as our correspondent reports, the movement claims it's facing a pushback from the authorities.
The latest student agitation is taking place hundreds of kilometers away from New Delhi. It's happening in the eastern Indian state of Jharkhand. It's one of India's poorest regions. And there for 3 weeks, thousands of students have been camped out in the capital city of Ranchi. Many have been on a hunger strike. The protest started after 2 exams for state government jobs saw alleged irregularities, including reported leaks. Now, the state government there, ruled by an alliance of parties opposed to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, have held multiple talks with protesters, and while most demands have been accepted, they are yet to accept the demand to allow a federal police team to probe these alleged irregularities. Experts say this will pull in Mr. Modi's federal administration, and the opposition party in power wants to avoid that. But over the weekend, protests intensified and demonstrators burned effigies of the chief minister there. They threatened to surround his residence, and now the local government is holding another round of talks with students to try and end this impasse. Now, Mr. Modi's party has criticized the local government's handling of this entire issue. For the Prime Minister's party, this comes just weeks after it was his party and government at the receiving end of a similar public protest, which was led by the Cockroach Janata Party here in New Delhi. The protest, which only ended after Mr. Modi's education minister resigned over an exam leak scandal, became the biggest show of dissent against Mr. Modi's rule. Now, the Cockroach movement has taken its entire movement to the grassroots by carrying out an audit of all state-run schools. They want to expose, they say, how poorly funded these schools are and how millions of children lack access to even basic amenities like clean toilets, electricity, or even teaching staff. But they allege that Mr. Modi's party is trying to prevent them from putting a spotlight on this issue in the state of Rajasthan. That region is ruled by Mr. Modi's party, and the government there has now issued an order prohibiting the unauthorized entry of outsiders. It says live streaming of school premises is also not allowed. The Cockroach movement has called this, quote, a cowardly order, saying its workers are ready to defy the order and face arrest, but this will not stop them, they say, from inspecting schools in that state and ensuring that schools are fixed immediately. Neha, Poonia, 4E News, New Delhi.
We're going to go to a quick break now, and when we return, I'll discuss the key regional headlines. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me this morning. We're going to return to the region now, and floods and landslides have hit communities across Afghanistan this year, leaving tens of thousands of people affected and adding further pressure to the country's already severe humanitarian needs. Our correspondent Tameem Bahiss has the details from Kabul.
More than 92,000 people have been affected by floods, landslides and other weather-related disasters across Afghanistan since the beginning of this year, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. OCHA says the disasters have hit communities in all 34 provinces and in over 200 districts between January and early August. At least 97 people have been killed and another 331 injured. Nearly 10,000 homes have been damaged while more than 2,100 have been destroyed, affecting almost 13,000 families. Eastern Afghanistan has been the hardest hit, with more than 51,000 people affected. Floods and flash floods account for most of the people impacted nationwide. Between July 20th and August 3rd alone, nearly 5,000 people were affected across 10 provinces, with Nuristan among the worst hit areas. The disasters have also damaged farmlands, roads, irrigation systems, water networks and local markets, further worsening conditions for communities already facing severe humanitarian needs. The latest figure comes as Afghanistan's humanitarian response faces a major funding shortfall. OCHA estimates that around 21.9 million people will need humanitarian assistance this year, while the 2026 response plans requires around $1.7 billion. So far, only about $447 million has been received, roughly 26% of the amount needed. Tameem, Bahiss, Kabul, A News.
Pakistan and 7 other Muslim countries are condemning Israel's rejection of a US-backed roadmap for ending the Gaza war. They're calling for Washington to ensure that the plan is implemented. Maryam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan has joined Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the UAE in rejecting Israel's opposition to a proposed roadmap for ending the war in Gaza. In a joint statement, the 8 countries described Israel's position as a direct rejection of the comprehensive plan, warning that it could hinder efforts to implement the roadmap and reach what they called a just and lasting peace. They also said Israel would bear responsibility for obstructing efforts to advance a political settlement in Gaza. The roadmap was developed through mediation by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States, and has been accepted by Palestinian factions. It calls for the disarmament of armed groups, an Israeli military withdrawal, and the deployment of an international stabilization force, Palestinian administration and reconstruction. The broader U.S. comprehensive plan was announced in September 2025 and later endorsed by the UN Security Council through Resolution 2803. Israel has rejected the roadmap, while 8 countries are calling for continued U.S. engagement to help secure its implementation. Maryam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Central Asia is attracting billions of dollars in new transport investment as countries seek faster and more secure trade routes between Asia and Europe. Much of the spending is focused on the Middle Corridor, which is set to transform the region into one of Eurasia's most important transit hubs. A News' correspondent Seva Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Central Asia is undergoing a major transport expansion, with $71.7 billion being channeled into 114 ongoing and planned projects across the region, according to the Eurasian Development Bank's 2026 Transport Observatory. Kazakhstan is the largest recipient, accounting for 45% of total investment. That is around $32 billion. Much of the investment is focused on the Trans-Sector network, including the Trans-Caspian International Transport Road, better known as the Middle Corridor. The road has attracted around $42.8 billion in investment and is designed to connect Central Asia with the Caspian region, the South Caucasus and Europe, providing an alternative trade route between China and European markets. China is also a major investor, with more than $12 billion going into transport projects across Central Asia. The largest individual project is the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, valued at around $4.7 billion. International financial institutions are also supporting regional connectivity. The European Union has allocated $10 billion for further middle corridor development, while Kazakhstan and the Asian Development Bank have agreed on a framework covering 15 projects worth around $5.4 billion through 2029. Roads account for 56% of regional transport investment, while railway make up almost 30%. The scale of investment is strengthening Central Asia's role as a major transit hub and an increasingly important link between Asian and European markets. Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
At least 7 people have been killed in a stampede at a temple in India's Bihar state. Police say a falling power pole may have caused panic among worshippers. The stampede happened as devotees gathered to offer water to the Hindu god Shiva during the holy month of Shravan. Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered condolences and said local officials were helping those affected. Now, yesterday we spoke with political analyst Nikola Mikovic about Central Asia investments in the Middle Corridor and what it tells us about the changes underway in the region. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
For China, the region is extremely important because it is an energy-rich region, and it also connects China with Europe. From the European perspective, Central Asia is also of key importance when we talk about the Middle Corridor. It's one of its main goals is to bypass Russia. And I'm absolutely confident that the European Union will continue investing in the modernization of the Middle Corridor because its ultimate goal is to have a reliable transportation network that does not depend on Russia. And that's one thing that China and the EU, despite their disagreements when it comes to their bilateral trade, they have in common. So the Middle Corridor is something that unites China and the European Union. And the United States is also interested in this project. We have reports that the United States is also investing in the modernization of some sections of the corridor. So the only loser in this game, I would say, is Russia, because it will lose its strategic influence in Central Asia region that has traditionally been in Moscow's geopolitical orbit.
That's all we've got time for this morning. Thank you very much for watching Daybreak, and from all of us here in the studio, have a wonderful start to your day. See you soon.